Okie dokie. So hello, welcome. Very good. Go champions. My name is Richy Srirachanikorn. I use he, him pronouns. I am the current racial justice representative of the Canadian Games Association, or CGSA.
And hi, I'm Kenzie. I use she, her pronouns. I am the coordinator for the multiplayer mentorship program. And if you're in the audience, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, drop a little intro in there.
And hi, I'm Andrea Braithwaite. I am currently the CGSA president. I use she, her pronouns, and I am delighted to be invited to join the team here on the very last of this year's MMP program talks.
Intern?
Mark, do you want to introduce yourself in a few words?
Absolutely. I'm Marc Ouellette. I'm currently associate professor, hiding nicely in the Department of English at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. But yeah, as my what we do in the shadows t-shirt today says, it's just a regular human guy.
Cool.
And I'm beyond chuffed to be here. I really am. Thank you so much for having me.
So, the more the merrier, because it's supposed to be a two-player talk, but there's four folks, and we'll explain that later. Just a welcome back or welcome again for the first time to those of you. This is part of our recent initiative of the CGSA called the Multiplayer Mentorship Program. And what we did was last fall, we got together as a team and we're like, hey, in academia, sometimes it's very much of a given, right? That if you're in a certain position, assistant prof, associate prof, late stage PhD students, a postdoc in a new country, in a new lab, for example, that part of the gig tacitly is to do mentorship. But there's no playbook, right, of how do you do good mentorship? How do you measure that? And when do you know if it's officially, quote unquote, over? So what we did was we applied for funding with the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences in Canada. And they've been very generous to fund our very first year of the MMP. And this is our 4 of 4 talks today with Mark from Old Dominion. And we can't wait to share with you what has happened.
Amazing. As always, before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that all of us are joining from locations across Turtle Island, where we are working and living on the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous communities, and we have ongoing responsibilities to treaty and reconciliation. So in particular, the digital infrastructure for these talks is being provided by the University of Alberta in Amiskwaciwâskahikan on Treaty 6, which is the traditional territory of the Nahiawa, Niitsitapi, Métis, Nakota, Dene, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples, and by Zoom, which is headquartered in San Jose, which is the traditional territory of the Muwekma Ohlone.
On this side of Concordia University, which is also going to be where the CGSA conference is at this year, we're located on unceded Indigenous lands, and we recognize that the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are the custodians of the waters and lands where we are gathered on. Historically, Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We are all committed in our ways to respect our ongoing relationship with Indigenous and other peoples in the Montreal and wider community.
And Mark and Andrea, we want to give you the opportunity as well if you wanted to speak to where you're at.
Absolutely. I'm actually 2 miles from the current boundary of the Great Dismal Swamp, the traditional home of the Powhatan Nation, and also looking west from where my cottage is actually looking towards Noëlville and Ouellette, Ontario, right on the edge of the Dokas First Nation, where my family is from.
Thanks, Mark. And the territory I work on is the lands and peoples of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, and that is covered by the Williams Treaties. And I personally, at this moment, am located directly across from the Scugog Island First Nation. I can see it when I look out my living room window.
Lovely, thank you. And I apologize for my dog. I'll go shut her up in a moment. But we want to acknowledge that, of course, many of our academic institutions have been and continue to be instruments for colonial violence and dispossession. And we affirm our responsibility to hold these institutions accountable and work towards true reconciliation. And with that, I will be right.
So, Kaylin, Gerald, Leonardo, Mark again, and Marie. Folks in the participant section, send a little emoji if you can, right? Let the chat pop off, as the youth hashtag on God says. Before we begin, I just want to lay out some house rules. This is very much conversational. During the talk, make sure that if you have any questions, just put in the chat, Kenzie and I. But today, Andrea, who's our moderator, will get to it during our little chat. Feel free also if you want to sort of raise your hand, and we can unmute you as well if you want. And finally, please be aware, as always, that this talk is being recorded for YouTube, so people can see it beyond the Zoom room. That's what the MMP is for. I think one last thing we're going to address as well is why there are sort of 4 people in this quote-unquote 2-player talk. This in itself, right, is an exemplar of one of the challenges of mentorship, right? Not just doing it, but organizing it within academia. You may have noticed that, in our previous weeks, there were sort of pairs, but Mark here today is a solo eagle. Things just don't work out sometimes, right? Personalities, schedules, there's different interests, things fall off last minute, for example. When we set up the MMP, we had 5 pairs. And this pair realized quickly, or another one actually, that they would not be able to make the logistics. So we now down to 4 pairs. Mark, however, was such great sport that even though his other mentor had dropped out the program, Mark stayed on, and here, with 1,000 things going on at once, has given us the time and his experience to tell us what's up. And Mark, I'll say it again, you're going to be invited again next year with an actual pair. So I'll pass it over to Andre. It means a lot to us, Mark.
Okay, great. We've heard a bit about who all of these folks are in relation to CGSA. And so to get us started, I am going to invite them to tell us a little bit more about who they are as researchers, as scholars, as research producers, and where they see themselves in relation to their institutions, in relation to what we think of as the sort of standard or expected academic trajectory, and in relation to game studies as a field. And so, Kenzie, can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. So at present, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta. I am in the tail end of this dissertation writing process. My own work kind of emerges from before I came back to grad school. I am a social worker. I worked as an outreach worker in domestic violence and in sexual violence. And I came back to game studies, actually because of my mentor. I'm sure we'll get into it, Sean Googlis. So I come from social work, which is a very collaborative discipline. Obviously, you can't do social work by yourself. And I've been in a digital humanities program the entire time that I've kind of been in the game studies world, which is also a very mentorship heavy area, or very collaboration heavy area. DH is not really a discipline that people do alone. It's dangerous to go alone. So a lot of my work has kind of been working, I work on a longitudinal research study, which is also a big collaborative effort. So I've been fortunate to kind of be embedded in a lot of disciplines and practices that are very collaboration oriented, which is part of why I was so excited to help with the MMP, because I think it's so important and lacking in other disciplines. My first BA is in history, and that's such a solo endeavor discipline. So it's nice to be in spaces where we're kind of trying to do something different than that. So yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Richy, tell us a bit about yours.
So I'm also a PhD student, now sort of writing the dissertation at Concordia University, Montreal. I thought my supervisor was dead. That's how I came to know Bart Simon. Was a I was trained in sociology at UBC, and then I wanted to understand attachment, human attachment. I was also working with younger children with music education, and I volunteered at a hospice. I still do today. So, that's sort of things that I'm thinking about on a daily basis. And I want to sort of understand before, at the deathbed or, when they're a little too young, sort of in the middle, right? Like, how do people negotiate um, pivotal moments or junctures in their lives, right? Sort of what are windows into their thoughts and minds and blueprints? And video games are a fantastic sort of window into people's minds, right? What would they like to do? What do they want to create? The worlds they sustain, albeit temporary, but lingering. And so I was searching up different articles, and I came across this one from Loading by Bart Simon. Loading's also CGSA's journal, and I thought he was dead because I was on a streak of reading dead sociologists, but I searched him up. I'm like, oh my God, he's still alive at Milieu. So I came, and I stayed for the master, jump into the PhD, and I've been, couldn't be happier since. And I study nostalgia. That's what I do.
Thanks so much. And Mark, please tell us about yours.
Okay. I guess I'm at a different end of the spectrum of the career. In a year's time, I'll be putting in my papers to be promoted to full professor. So I'm at the stage where I'm far less worried about my own packet than I am about making sure that there are spaces and opportunities for people who are needing and worthy and deserving and earn them, and doing all the things that helpful things that were done for me, and making sure that I repeat those, and making sure that it's everybody says it's different when it'll be different when I'm in charge, and I'm in charge and a little bit and occasionally, and so it's different, and I make sure that so that's the sort of where I'm at. How I got here, I'm the first cultural studies PhD from McMaster. People seem to forget that, which is okay. So my first publication in game studies predates the CGSA. And somewhere around 2002, I had a chapter of my dissertation is on gender and playing Tomb Raider and Resident Evil and some other games, Siphon Filter as well. My specialty is actually gender, sex, and sexuality and pop culture. And living in the South in the anti-DEI era, I also feel a need to make that as apparent as possible these days, because there's a chill right now. We received a memo from the Department of Justice in the fall telling us that we could be held criminally responsible if we had DEI programs. That memo has been used to close programs, to shift programs. We're now actively hiding programs. Our African American Studies program is designated for closure right now at Old Dominion, and Old Dominion graduates more African American students than any historically Black college or university, any of the HBCUs. So this is kind of a very a chilling time for a lot of us who've been in this a realm of cultural studies, gender studies, anything around these sorts of areas. So I think it's important for someone like me who has the track record, but also the shards of glass, as my grad students call them, that sometimes tenure is a shepherd's cloak in a storm. And so I guess that's sort of how I got here and why I got here and what I'm after and what I'm doing. I'm more on that in a little while. I have some nifty, keen, good news too.
Thanks so much, Mark. This actually is a great lead in to the first question I wanted to ask. Some people say mentorship in academia is just part of the job. Profs are expected to be available for it during office hours. Late stage PhD students are just supposed to intuit how the game works. Postdocs are often expected to take on the lead for research groups. And so I'd love to hear from all three of you about what you think of this understanding that it is just part of the job. Is mentorship more than just part of the job? What are some of the other ways, structured and less structured, visible and less visible, that we mentor each other in academia?
Andrea, I think that like something that I've definitely really benefited from, and I think it depends on the person, right? Because some people, as Mark kind of alluded to at the beginning, I think some people do have to be told it's your job to mentor. But a lot of people do it because they care about the experiences of people who are, behind them on the academia train. Um, in my experience, um, informal mentorship relationships have almost always been more valuable than like sit down in a room and listen to this person relationships. So, I mentioned that I've been really fortunate to work on this longitudinal research study. And we have four co-PIs. We have Alison Harvey, Johanna Westar, Jen Whitson, and Chung Googlis. And just working with those four incredible people over this course of 5 years, like I've learned more than I would ever learn. Just like put me in a box and listen to somebody talk, because we're working, right? And they're getting to mentor me not just through like didactic, like here's this, blah, 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 but like how do we solve this problem and how do we work together to solve this problem? And I think that's a really nice opportunity we get in academia is we have so many different little projects that we get chances to work together on things. And I think we've seen that in the TPTs, like our mentors have gotten to work together on something, and through working together, they've exchanged knowledge and ideas versus kind of the like sit and deliver strategy, which I think is, helpful perhaps in some contexts, but is like so valuable. So I think that's been like the biggest thing for me is when you work on something with someone, you learn not just how to do it, but much about how they approach the work, how they approach the world, how they orient themselves, all those kinds of things.
Um, I loved what Mark had said earlier about how tenure is sort of a shepherd's cloak in a storm. I can see that sort of like, guiding light, and I can see Kenzie here sort of saying, appreciate the small moments and the unexpected folks around you. If you're going to be sort of in the storm, why not sing the song of storms, right? Or just enjoy it while it lasts. It's sort of an arduous, highly precarious thing that Mark alluded to, right? It's this sort of like spleef or like falling chessboard kind of situation we're in. um, it's like a bus stop. Like grad school for me is a bus stop. Everyone here is here, unless, I guess they're prof, to get somewhere. So you have this sort of period of your life, either 2 all the way to like 7 years, I guess, to really get to know these people and all of the fascinating ways that they untangle problems that come with them. One of the main things that I've been able to sort of see it beyond, it's just part of the job mentorship, is that the job feels purposeful, right? Like, yes, it is a job. Yes, you get paid RAs and TAs, but coming to a place where researchers are curated together, like here in Concordia, we have the TAG lab, right? The Technoculture Arts and Games lab. That's currently managed by Marc Lajeunesse, who's also a recent PhD here in comms. And the sort of camaraderie that we have here, everyone is from everywhere. So there's no competition, there's perhaps less imposter syndrome, and there's genuine, I want to learn more about you because I get to learn how you, as a sociologist, if I'm a comms person, sees this game, and how I can learn more about how you interpret classic texts. So I think one of the key things to find in grad school is not to just sort of stay in your lane only, your department, because that's so much of a job, but to find these little pockets of opportunity, especially these sort of spaces where things like this can happen.
Thanks so much. Mark, are there any particular ways in which this expectation of mentorship has felt both challenging and like an opportunity at the same time for you?
There's challenging is in terms sometimes the bureaucracy of it. That's the part I occasionally find challenging, as opposed to the opportunity of it. Like I get paid to be curious. Like I think that's one of the things I think about this job. That's the sort of thing that keeps me going. And grad students and colleagues and just friends, like because of the research area I have, anybody who tells me something I didn't know is doing me a favor. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is that I was always the curious kid that I always wanted to figure out how things worked. And then the next thing is that I'm a coach's kid. So I grew up in a gym. My dad was a coach for 30 plus years. I was at my first game when I was 7 days old. So I sort of have that. It's almost, an instinctive, habitual sort of practice to sort of, okay, fit in. Like, how can I contribute to this? Even if it's not all going right, how can I make this, better for my presence? Like, how can I contribute, even if I'm not the star, if I haven't got my best stuff that day? And it also set me up in a situation where, from sports, particularly in that environment, of knowing, okay, you're not always going to be the best in the room. But that doesn't mean you can't contribute, that you're only as good as next time. Don't, if it went perfectly the time before, great. If it didn't, and you did all the work, that happens. You're only as good as next time, and you still have to, whether you got a star or you didn't, you still have to go out and do it again. And that was always sort of the sort of the way that was approached, and working with people who are not always as talented, but are working just feverishly, right? Working to a froth to get the job done, and knowing how that works and how everybody can contribute. And always one of my favorite things is that where I went to school, when I went to school, was a kind of an interesting time, and there was an opportunity to see a lot of talks. And so there was one particular academic who came in for the Hooker lectures at McMaster, and they get paid somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 to walk in and give a series of lectures. I learned nothing about literature. I learned nothing about theory. I learned a lot about how to be a prof, and how to play the sort of the game, about the performativity of it. There was one particular series that I learned that. There was also another conference, and this is one of my habits that I picked up along the way, is that I'll only ever tell you the people who were nice to me. If I name somebody, it's because I've been at this a while and I'm supposed to know people. But I will also only ever name the people who were good to me, who were good to others, with 2 exceptions. So I was at a conference in 1999. I was freshly finished my coursework, about to go off and write my comps, and I was at a conference at Laurentian in one of their church colleges, which is similar to Waterloo. So it was a very familiar environment to me, having gone to Waterloo, and they had us all holed up in this church college. And one of the keynotes was Marjorie Garber, who was chair of women's studies at Harvard at the time, and she was a friend of one of the conference organizers. They'd gone to school together. And so there we were in this late April, early May, spring day in Sudbury, and Marjorie Garber stayed in the same church college with the rest of us, and didn't do the star thing at all, like I've seen so many other people do at conferences. And there we were, sitting out on the step, having leftover sandwiches on paper plates, and having an impromptu snack and conversation. And she was just so absolutely generous, and enthralled to hear everything we had to say. And I was like, okay, don't forget this. Don't miss this opportunity. Don't be a jerk. But don't ever forget how, just this is how to be in a situation like that, and not do the star thing. And that was very edifying as well, So I try and take something from every situation, and learn from it and improve that way.
Thanks. Yeah, this this raises another interesting question I'd like to punt over to Kenzie and Richy, given the different stages folks are at. For your sense of things academia does well when it comes to forming mentoring relationships and mentorship opportunities, and places academia needs to improve those kinds of relationships and opportunities.
Okay. Okay. Things that could improve. Well, I think that something that I've found, because I've been in for a long time, I have had both my kids, so I had two mat leaves. Like this is my 10th year in grad school. And I think something that I've realized over time is you need to have contact with many different kinds of people, because different kinds of people will give you different kinds of advice, and some of it is not going to work for you. So I certainly have, sometimes you hear from scholars when you're talking about, oh, it's so hard to write. And people will be like, well, have you tried going for a 1 week writing retreat? Like, that was so helpful for me. And as a parent of young kids, I'm like, yeah, that does sound super helpful, but like, haha, that's never going to happen, right? So that's useful advice for someone. It's not necessarily logistically feasible advice for me. On the other side, I had a supervisor before who's like a superstar academic. She's incredible, and she has twins. And she was, when I had my first kid, she was like, well, when you get up at 2 a.m. to do a feeding, that's a great time to read an academic article. And I was like, what? Maybe for you. But like, I'm not going to retain any of that. So I think like having access to that range of different experiences, because maybe for someone that is great advice, right? And I think depending on the discipline we are in, it can be hard to get that range of experiences, especially, if we are someone who looks different or has different life circumstances than the people whose mentorship we have access to, and the people who make it into those academic positions tend to be people whose life circumstances have enabled that. Right. So particularly if you're a person who is like dealing with different kinds of obstacles, like if you don't have access to people whose mentorship matches your life experience, I think that's a challenge. And I think like, there's a reason that Richy is the racialized, I'm forgetting your title now, Richy, the racial justice representative, is because like we don't de facto have those kinds of support structures in academia, because it favors certain kinds of people. So I think that is like an area where sometimes it lets people down, is you don't necessarily have access to insights from people who are experiencing what you're going through. So that was a con thing. I'll pass it to you, Richy, and if I think of any super pro things, I'll steal it back.
I'll start with what I really like about academia. And I'm just going to say what I like about the field that I'm fortunately in, because I don't know the big machine, right? I'm just a cog in it. I'm a sociologist in a game studies lab in an interdisciplinary institute with 7 clusters that don't technically belong as a department to the university. So, if I was in the sociology department, I would be holed up in a little office with no windows. That's fine. We know what we signed up for. What I like about this, I'm at the Milieu Institute, by the way, at Concordia, is that there's an open sketchbook here, right? And Marc earlier said that one of the things that he's really thankful for is that he grew up as a curious kid, right? And there's sort of that coach's kid, that sort of competitive, but also like a team player spirit, right? Sort of you see the big picture, you see the game from end to end. I like watching people work here. I feel very lucky that in the places that I'm in the opportunities that profs have given me. Last week, I was doing a nostalgia workshop with Carly Zeter, who is an urban ecologist, and 2 of her students, and architecture is architects from UDM, University of Montreal, and that opened up a whole world for me. Sort of like, oh, I didn't know nostalgia can be used as a blueprint for intergenerational sort of like people who grew up in the same neighborhood in Montreal, but yearn for different things. You know, older folks, for example, yearn for when the Lachine Canal was clear and they swam in it. Younger folks yearn for stories that their moms and dads told them about it. And it's sort of like, oh crap, I could have written that as my dissertation. Bart's like, no, 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 keep me alive. So I love seeing how people work here, different ways of approaching the same goal. We're always entangling this yarn ball. Something that I wished, as Andre asked, could be a little more sort of improved on is it's still with me. It's the playbook, right? Like some of us are here because we have children and we're superstars like Kenzie. Some of us are here shortly, like myself. I wish there was a sort of like a playbook of how do you sort of or a model that universities can use or like departments can use where you sort of take your research level to the next step, right? There's like courses, then there's comps, then after the comp exams, there's the whatchamacallit, proposal, and then you're off ABD, good luck, right? And do every other contract work in between. I wish there was a sort of one more period in there where either you can either choose to be like a more outspoken quote unquote public scholar, or there's like a instead of doing the research seminar classes where you spend 3 hours sort of learning how to have good relationships with your supervisors, those 3 hours could be like, hey, you're all from the same discipline, why don't you come together and create a research project so you learn skills, right? Like low stakes within the class. I wish we had that support, that one more denouement before it's like now go off and figure it out. Because I feel like I missed out on something, even though I'm running on my 2 feet right now. And I wonder if Andrea and Marc, as professors as well, if you ever, I mean, I'm sure you have thought of and pitched this, and what was the feedback or pushback? Governance, bureaucracy, funding.
Yeah, thanks, Richy. I was listening to you and Kenzie talk about your experiences as graduate students. It made me want to ask Marc, like as a senior academic, your approaches for launching mentorship relationships with students, with junior scholars. And I'm sure you and I could both attest to some of the unwritten rules that are in place around this, because in very few locations are there written rules.
Yeah, the one of the things it's in the chat. I'm reading the chat as well and listening to Richy and Kenzie, and so one of the things that was mentioned was conferences and networking and stuff like that, and being willing to find those places. Like when I started, I long enough ago. At McMaster, I can remember being told that a dissertation on masculinity and pop culture, that's, pardon me, that's not done, Marc. Just like that, just like that. And being able to also have the freedom to go where the research takes me. So one of the things that I do with my grad students, whether it's in a class or later on, if the mentorship relationship develops, it's is go where the research takes you. That's the first thing. That always has to be the first thing. And we have to get the job done. At the end of the day, the research has to get done. So one of the things I was willing to do was go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because that was the first and only place that would take a paper on video games in 1999, 2000. And so I flew all the way out there from McMaster. Didn't know anybody. I'm on the editorial board for their journal now. And I've been a member that predates the game studies area. I'm member number, it depends. It's a bone of contention. I'm either member number 3 or member number 4 of the Learning Games Initiative, which is now at the University of Arizona. And they have one of the largest archives of video games there, hosted by Ken McAllister and Judd Regil. And I've known Judd for over 25 years. And now the game studies area at SWPACA, we pride ourselves on the fact that it's the second most productive, it's the second largest area after film and history, which was the original one. So and the game studies area at SWPACA has only been around since 2006, 5 or 6. But in terms of papers, panels, collections, books, references for people, writing references for people, introducing people, all these things that were done for me, and we pride ourselves on this is something that we do, that we try and ensure that there are spaces for people to be creative, to be original, and join the conversation, that people are welcome to join the conversation. So I think that's one of the things that, it does take a little bit of, you sort of have to put yourself out there and occasionally take some risks. But I also remember all the people, as I've said before, the cold calling that Gerald mentioned, sending an email to Alex Doty at the University of Indiana, and just, with a question. And next thing you know, I've got an email back, and he's looked up my stuff, and he's told me, he said, Mark, never thought of doing this for games. But yeah, it seems like you're the guy. And then next thing you know, he's asking me about, the picture I had in the background, because I'm standing in one of the pictures, I'm standing in front of the town sign for Ouellette, Ontario. And he's like, oh, there's a Doty in Michigan. And he's telling me all these sorts of things. And this was a star in the field, right? And in my field at the time. And that led to something, and led to something, led to something. So the next time, and when it happened in my PhD, they didn't have anybody, enough people and enough bodies in the English department at my master to cover my PhD. So they sent me looking across campus for somebody. And they said, oh, go see this guy in communication studies. He's good. He's going to be, yeah, he needs it. And he looks at me and he says, yeah, Mark, no, I can't help you. I just kind of like that. And my shoulders, they must have heard the thud of them going from the 7th floor all the way to the basement of Ken Taylor Hall. And I said, and he said, but I know a guy. And I was like, oh, no, I know a guy. And let's go. Can you be at such and such a place on Friday? And I was like, yeah, I can be there. Next thing you know, I'm there on Friday. And Jay Coakley, Peter Donnelly, Brian Pronger, Graham Knight, and Phil White, all these sports sociologists are sitting there at a table with a pitcher of beer and a basket of chips. And they introduced me, and the next thing you know, one of them is on my committee. And I get to meet all these top flight sports sociologists, and it's like, my goodness, this isn't fair. How cool is this? What a lucky opportunity this is. Make the most of it. So when I say, like I said before, if I say I know a guy, I'm not passing somebody off. It's because I do want somebody to succeed, and maybe I'm not the best person in that for that student. So things we do well, there are things we do well. There are things we don't do well that we could do better on. I think some of it, I think sometimes the academy rewards a singular brilliance too much. That we don't necessarily always reward people who are multiply original and intellectual. That the singular brilliance still gets rewarded a little bit. Another thing we could do better is, I think sometimes we actually, for whatever reason, we cultivate the imposter syndrome as opposed to making sure it just doesn't happen. I think, and I see that sometimes in my own grad students, and that's kind of troublesome. In terms of establishing the relationship, what are rules and unwritten rules? I always ask a generous question first, a very, very generous, curious question first, and never like a trap or anything like that. That's one of the ways. Always start with that. Always thank somebody for their contribution. But because of the way the situation is, I'm also occasionally very, very I'll wait for somebody to ask me. I will wait. I'm not gonna go out and say, oh yeah, I need to mentor this person, and I will I will wait. Make it obvious that you are, do all the things necessary to be a mentor, and then people will find you and go, yeah, I think I want that guy to mentor me, as opposed to based on what you're doing and what your daily practice is, how you go about your business, as opposed to, actively seeking out and going, oh yeah, I'll come under my wing. I've never done that. And I will never do that. That's one of my unwritten rules. Somebody has to ask me first. On the other hand, anybody who knows me knows that for any of my grad students and for early career researchers with whom I have any sort of relationship, I have a standing offer. I'm good for 3,000 words or whatever you can't finish on just about any topic. I'm a cultural studies guy. I get called a dabbler. I get called a shapeshifter all the time. So the next time I get called that is no big deal. But it also means that I do have coverage. And the other thing is that the idea is that how can we maybe somebody hasn't got the time resources or the accessibility resources, or how do I finish this, or how can I do it? And it's like, okay, standing offer. If you need words to get something in print, or you're trying to figure out how do I get this in print, come and find me. That's a standing open-ended offer. That's it. The other thing is to see some of these opportunities. How can I create opportunities or include people in conversations and make sure people are being included in conversations? That's really, really important. So my next thing is like I can show you guys the email if you want me to share screen. I literally got a contract for a big 50, 60 chapter 2-volume set from Springer this morning. And I always save chapters for good people. And the other thing is take the approach that every paper, like if I'm an editor of something or somebody asked me to vet something, every paper is publishable. Every paper is publishable. That was instilled in us way back in the day, working for a journal that came out of Bowling Green, out of the School of Cultural Studies and American Studies there with Ray Brown at Bowling Green. Ray Brown's last group of grad students started a journal. And I was lucky enough to meet them. And through connections with SOPACA and PCA. And so our policy was always every paper is publishable. If we do the work and we get it there, every paper is publishable. So always take that approach as well. It's easy. That's not hard. That's really actually not that hard.
Thank you. On the theme of the unwritten rules, one of the things, to respond to your question, Richy, that I've noticed, I'm in a teaching-only position, which are increasingly common, particularly in Canada, as roles within our institutions. And one of the unwritten rules I learned very quickly, having a background in academic labor organizing, is that it is fine to collaborate with colleagues and coworkers to talk about the job, but it is not acceptable to do that same sort of mentorship when it comes to the job conditions, right? And so talking about ways to be a better teacher is understood as a valuable act of mentoring, but talking about ways to agitate within your institution to change the conditions in which we teach, class sizes, teaching assistants that are actually there to help teach and not just marker graders, right? And so this strikes me as a very common unwritten rule of mentorship is to work with people on how to do the job better and to say very little about how to try to change the system for the better so that the obstacles we are all encountering in doing the job better aren't there for the folks that come after us. And I've learned so much from colleagues of mine in very different departments. I am a humanities person at a tech school, about how we bring our different strengths to bear on this process of trying to work within and change our institutions. And so that makes me think about our field of game studies more broadly. It's interdisciplinary. We run into colleagues with, as everybody's experiences here demonstrate, this really huge range of backgrounds that they bring to the game studies table. And I would love to hear from you folks about what you think about game studies as a discipline when it comes to the kinds of collaborative and mentor-based experiences that we get here that we might not get elsewhere.
Can I jump in there real quick? I just want to also say that to everything Andrea just said, in a past life, I was also vice chair of CUPE's Ontario University Workers Coordinating Committee, including the 2010 provincial discussion table, talking about very much the conditions of the employment. And so there is a cost to that. And I'm not going to pretend there isn't a cost to that. Particularly when sometimes being in the United States feels like an exile. But on the other hand, to go to the other part of that, when I'm thinking about how we do these sorts of things and the rules and the unwritten rules of things, and also in terms of as Andrea was saying quite nicely there, the relationships that we forge start day one. Like the very first thing when you walk into my classroom, and I do call it my classroom because I'm more or less I'm supposed to be in charge of the space. And so it's my job to make sure that is a safe and inclusive space. So, like, and I give you an example from this year. As you probably know, we did have a what is characterized as a terror attack and mass shooting on campus in March, and the attack was on our ROTC. And the shooter had been stalking our ROTC. This was known. And I had an ROTC student in my class. I also had a student who was from one of the countries being attacked right now, being bombed. And everybody in my classroom felt safe. That's the thing. And I was thanked. Thank you for creating a safe space for us. Thank you for making sure there was a safe space for us. So the first thing I do is I make sure everybody knows day one, the university decided you belong here. Therefore, I've decided you belong here. Let's get past everything else. We all belong here, and I want to know more. I want to learn from you. As much as I might be teaching you, I also want to learn from you. So it starts day one with that trust, and that amount of trust, establishing that trust isn't easy, but it's the number one thing that I do over and over again is to try and I've probably taken this definite sort of a tangent away from Andrea's question too much, but I'll stop there and say, but it starts day one with that trust. And then the other thing is to tell the students and then actually do it is once you come through my door, and in 20 plus years, over 7,000 students, give or take, have come through my door. That's a lifetime collegial relationship, as far as I'm concerned. If you have a question 20 years from now, ask me. I received messages after that terror attack from students I had at McMaster 20 years ago wanting to know, but I also regularly receive emails where they, hey, how are you? What's going on? And what do you think of this? Did you see this? This is probably in your area of interest. And when I say it's a lifetime collegial relationship, I actually do mean it. And I actually do practice that. And that is actually something I do. So if my course is on your transcript, that's a lifetime collegial relationship. So the last time, one of the more keen things I had was I had to validate somebody's med school application 20 years after the fact because they needed a second year course um, uh, in English, to apply to UBC's med school. And it was 20 years after I taught the student applying to med school, because you never know what somebody's career path is going to be. You never know how things are. So establish that relationship and say, look, this is a lifetime relationship, collegial relationship, and set that boundary on it right away as well. It's a collegial relationship. We may eventually be friends if we become peers, but it's a collegial relationship, and it has to what are the limits, what are the boundaries, but establish that trust and that relationship early.
I can jump in to go a little back to your question, Andrea, about like what game studies in particular offers. I think because of the interdisciplinarity, we have so much to learn from each other. Like when Richy and I were looking through all the applications to be in the multiplayer mentorship program, we made this like mind map of like what do people know and what do they want to learn. And like so many people wanted to learn how to do game design or knew how to do game design, or they were from humanities and they're like, how do I do participant research? How do I do social sciences methods? Like, because everyone is so different and like almost nobody comes from like a consistent set of disciplinary traditions and backgrounds, like person to person, I think there is so much opportunity for that like productive collaboration, right? Of like, I can teach you how to do something, and in that process, you can teach me. And I think like game studies, not many disciplines have like such a diverse crossover of people that we're in this like melting pot, and everybody knows how to do something that nobody else knows how to do, which can be challenging sometimes, because I certainly have gone to many CGSA talks where I'm like, I don't know anything that anyone here is talking about because it's from like a totally different end of the pool than I'm swimming in, right? But there's so many opportunities there. So I think that that's like a really beautiful aspect of our discipline in particular. And I think it encourages people to cross over and collaborate, because like you can't just stay in a little silo of I only think about this small pool of scholars and ideas.
Richy, would love to hear from you on this as well as we wrap up, especially as the engine behind this MMP program and the opportunities it's created.
First and foremost, a Christmas tree is nothing without its stars. Kenzie is the star behind this whole coordinator. No, yes, I'm going to edit this out as a yes. So Kenzie has been a joy to work with everybody here, including Mark and Kaylin's also in the chat as well, all the MMP programs. I mean this, I really do. It couldn't happen without that. I think for me, one of the best advice lines I've gotten that corresponds to how game studies intersect with the way we work is take the apples, but not the tree. So Mark earlier was talking about, sort of like his stamp booking, right? Like if you're part of my class, if you're in, I'm always going to like be collegial and look out for you. And, as long as you're a good human being, and it stays, right? And Kenzie earlier was just talking about sort of the generativity of getting involved in game studies. For me, it's you're in this really interdisciplinary, fun, deeply nostalgic and resonant thing. So as opposed to perhaps another maybe history or another kind of discipline where you have to sort of build years and years of knowledge to then be able to quote unquote get the background that your profs have, things like games right away, right? Like there's an intergenerational sort of time bond between people from different places, and instantly you can bond over a particular game. And that's I think that Gerald and I are also sort of trying to write in the chat of how you sort of find collegiality and friendship within this really long game of academia. What I mean by take the apples but not the tree is to build. Part of how I've been able to find some footing in this precarious sand pit that I'm in is to build different research communities. So CGSA is one of them, MMP is one of them, the Nostalgia Network, it's the Nostalgia Network for artists and academics. All of these other things that we build, we should because we can. And when we take the apples is, you build the tree there, there's a footing, and whether or not it withers or it stays, you take the skills that you want, you take the memories, and you move on to the next thing, whilst also trusting others to grow it. Game studies, just as a final thing as well, reminds me of that quote from, was it Bernard Suits, about how the enjoyment of a game is to go from A to B, but to take the most complicated path and have fun while you're at it, right? Like that's this. It's day one and diploma, or diploma and tenure track and tenured, but everything else, that wiggly line, have fun.
Thanks so much for that, Richy, and thank you as well to Kenzie and Marc for joining today. This is the last of this round of the two-player talks as part of the inaugural year of the multiplayer mentorship program. And we hope that everyone, today's participants, the other mutual mentors in the program, will begin to feel like the game of academia is something you aren't playing alone. Things like mutual mentorship can happen anywhere and with anyone, and there's an MMP waiting to happen at your institution if you want. If you are looking forward to learning more about this, to meeting some of the mutual mentors, or even other folks from CGSA who are interested in participating in stuff like this, our annual conference, countdown is on. It starts June 11th, is the place for you. And on behalf of the CGSA executive, we are really excited to welcome you there virtually and in person in Montreal in June. Thank you for coming, and I can't wait to see you all again soon.